But yeah, I don't know if we've met yet, so welcome. And what do you want to talk about? Are you there?
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We haven't spoken before.
Okay, well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Are you a Christian?
I am, yeah.
And you discuss theological issues?
Yeah, so this channel, my educational and academic background is philosophy specifically, but I do delve into like philosophy of religion, yeah, and then some theology as well.
All right. So, do you have a belief on whether God's energies or graces are created or uncreated?
Yeah, I would think that they're uncreated.
They're uncreated. Okay. Well, I understand that that's the Eastern Orthodox position,
Yeah.
and within the Catholic Church, I know that there's a diversity of opinion.
Yeah.
So,
Could you be more specific about what you mean about the God's energies or graces? Just so we're all on the same page.
well, graces I typically interpret to mean things like humility, charity,
Okay.
revelation, and energies I would take to mean like the creation of matter.
Okay.
So presumably God creates both those things. Is that what you understand God's energies to be?
Okay, good. Yeah. So thanks for allowing me to clarify. So, as far as matter, obviously that's going to be created, and as far as grace is, insofar as they are part and parcel. Uh, I mean, God doesn't exist in parts, but if they are parts of God or aspects or elements of God, that is just his nature, then those are going to be uncreated. Let's say that it's in his character, deeply embedded, to be forgiving or loving, right? That part will be uncreated, but when it's instilled in human beings or realized in human beings, then that will be, of course, created because it will be a new instance of the thing, the source. Like this, like transcendental would be in God, and then the instance of that transcendental of that thing would be created. If that helps.
Okay. Well, I think I understand the position. So I just don't think that it makes sense to say that graces are a part of God, or that there's I can't remember the way that you phrased it. So that there's some transcendental aspect of basically the kind of aspects of structure. That's the view that I would be arguing against. So I would always argue that the graces, as well as the energies, are both they're both a will, right? So they're a kind of intent that God. They're just like intentional states that God has. They're not structural parts. So I mean, I'd regard God to be a mind. Um, I'd say that parts are like static things. They're not functional. They're not in the mathematical sense. They're not functional. So a function in mathematics is something that transfers transfers an element to another from one space to another space.
Okay.
So I think that the issue is that I would basically ask you if you regard graces to transmit something, like to be the transmission of something, or if you think that there's any kind of static aspect to them.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So it gets to the nature of God Himself. Yeah, so I take the position, along with like classical philosophers and many Catholic philosophers like Aquinas, who will say that God is unchangeable. He's immutable, right? So he's just and he's pure actuality. Like everything is going to be actual and like actualized in him. There's going to be no potentiality in him whatsoever. So there's going to be no like latent power that God could have, yet it will be realized later. Everything that includes thoughts as well and ideas. Like everything, every thought that God could possibly have is going to be actual to God at all times, because He is pure actuality. So everything that God could possibly have, He already has, including these graces. So in that sense, these are will be uncreated if we mean by that, like we're talking about the attributes of God, that He is loving, for example. And if we ever receive that grace as Christians to be loving like God, what that means is, we are creatures, of course. So whatever attributes we take on will move from potential to actual, and in that sense, it will be a new thing that we take on. It won't. It will be created in us, in a sense, right? But its origin uncreated. But Christian authors do talk about the idea that would be described in terms of becoming more unified in likeness, or in a sorry. This actually, St. John of the Cross distinguishes them. He's known for his Dark Night of the Soul literature, but he's actually a scholastic author and thinker as well. But he distinguishes between a unity of affections and a unity of likeness. So this would be a unity of affections between the Christian and God, that you would become unified in love and forgiveness and kindness and so on. But you won't be ever unified in likeness towards God, because you're still a creature. You won't be like God in that sense of substance, but yeah. So we can unite to God in affections and become more like Christ, more like God in that sense. Of course, other religious systems like Mormons do think you can, like unite to God in likeness and become like God that way, but the Christians don't. So, yeah, does that help? Like, is this helping at all? Like me helping to like catch this out a little bit more?
Yeah, well, I think that identifies probably where we'll disagree.
Okay,
I think
sure.
that we would probably, it sounds like we agree on the manner in which we participate in God's energies. So if I pray and I receive some grace and I sort of perceive that I've just received something, it's quite obvious that that's created because it's subject to conditions. Where we might disagree is that I would like to see if just to hear what your basis is for saying that God is purely actual and that there's no potentiality, because I can think of a couple of places where I disagree. So,
sure.
For example, I'm an open theist, so I think that God's knowledge increases, despite the fact that he's also omniscient, so he knows all.
Okay.
He knows all true propositions, but so propositions that are in the future that are contingent on human free will, they don't have truth value, so there's nothing to know until they become actual.
Okay, I see.
And let's also say the same thing about like treasure in heaven. It's like what human beings do to earn their treasure in heaven. Those things aren't actual yet. So the point of time is for God to discover himself and to sort of increase the treasure, and that's just going to continue forever.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm an open theist. I think that God has potential, and that we are we're like an aperture or a gate for that potential.
That makes total sense. Yeah. So I toyed around with open theism when it was very trendy, like in early 2010s, and then that was before it became Catholic. And I don't think that's Catholic position at all. I don't. I think it gets most of its currency on, if you're talking about theories of time, A theory versus B theory of time. Are you familiar with that distinction? But we can describe it for the audience. So A theory of time is like a spotlight, going across like a timeline, and so wherever the spotlight is, that's the present, and whatever it has it, whatever it's already passed, that's going to be the past, and it exists, but only insofar as it's past. But the stuff that the spotlight hadn't gotten to yet doesn't exist, and that's a very like intuitive idea. And this, I think, open theism gets a lot of currency on, because again, if God, open theists can still declare that God is omniscient, but with an asterisk by that word omniscient. They say omniscient because this means knowing all things that are possible to know, and it's not possible to know something that doesn't exist, namely the future. So God just won't have knowledge of those things, and so they think that preserves omniscience. Now, I don't know about open theists' relationship with the B theory time. The B theory time is like, it's almost like you can think of it as like a wheel. If it's cyclical, or maybe that helps. Maybe it's not cyclical, but all items of past, present, and future are equally present to God, whether God exists outside of time or in time or some other different relationship with time. But all of those are equally real to God. I think, like at first, like because it wasn't that intuitive to think that way, I was like, no, that's obviously not right. But now I'm warming up to that position a little bit. Like I don't really have a dog in the fight, but it seems to be more plausible. And this, I would think this would cut against open theist. I can't think of any B theorists who think open theism is true. That's just sort of the lay of the land. Do you have thoughts on how I've construed that, and would you agree with that construal?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have my own issues with the dichotomy between A theory and B theory of time. I'm not totally sure that they're like truly dichotomous. It's like,
Okay.
I mean, I can agree that time has potential, but that only the present and the past exist.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So this means that, yeah, I can completely understand why certain graces given to humans based on their subjective or contingent nature, and based on the future as not being real and not existing yet, then sure, those instantiations of God's grace are going to be unknown to God, let's say, who gets it. Now, I will challenge this though. I did read about this, or maybe I just kind of had this idea of my own when I was looking through this. Like, another way to preserve God's omniscient and perhaps even his knowing of who will get the graces in the future is to place it in terms of like laws of physics, the past and the present, and say that God is omniscient of all those things for sure, for sure. Like, we have very limited perspective, of course, but like God would know based on all of our dispositions and habits and likelihoods and probabilities. It would be somebody like Doctor Strange, in the Avengers movies, who's like calculating all the probabilities and knows from that there will be like only one path way forward. And in that sense, kind of derivative sense, like knows the future. Would you say that if that were the scenario with God, that he would, like, he could know that people will get the graces, or would you still want to kind of resist that?
Well, I would resist. I think that certainly there are deterministic patterns on which we can base some kind of probabilistic estimation, but that still doesn't secure whether something is true or false. When it comes to human actions, when it comes to human actions that are based on free will, the only thing that secures it is the human deciding that.
Yeah. This might highlight a potential disagreement again, another potential disagreement between us, because I think that while humans have free will, I do believe in libertarian free will. I'm a libertarian, but not a radical libertarian. I think that our habits and dispositions, our virtues, our vices, really constrain our possibilities as well. And so, if like I knew that, like if I were omniscient, if I knew all those things about a person, then freedom will be constrained in some sense with respect to virtues and vices. Like, if you're a chronic liar, you are constrained with the possibility to then, right in that instant, tell the truth. But like down the road, you might. So there's a little bit of flexibility there in free will, but you have to kind of get. You're not certain possibilities, that is to say, are just going to be closed to you. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but thoughts on that?
Well,
so I believe really strongly in like character, habits, virtues, vices, and so on, and that might limit the nature of libertarian free will. That was the idea.
Okay. Well, what I'd like to hear is, did you have like an argument that God doesn't have potential, that he's completely actual?
Yeah, I do think that if God, I think that if you make a God that is mutable, this in some sense makes him less sovereign. That's my understanding. I think there are arguments in Aquinas' Summa about this. Similar arguments would also go towards there just being one God. Like, if you're going to have a totally perfect and complete God, absolute perfection, you can't have a God that lacks anything. And so, if you have a God with potential, that is necessarily saying that your God lacks something currently that could have later, and is therefore less perfect. Perfecta in Latin, perfectus, just means complete as well. So you're saying that you now have a God less perfect or complete, that later on he will be more perfect or more complete because he has the thing that he was lacking before. So this is why many Christian philosophers of classical antiquity and medieval period want to say, no, God is just purely actual.
Okay, well, I guess my response is going to be that I can have a conception of perfection to just mean to having the maximum possible. Right? So if there's different conceptions of perfection. So like one is like some kind of category that contains all subcategories. So like a perfect circle. It's just a circle that represents every other circle. And then the other is obviously having the maximum of something. So like if I get a perfect score in an exam, if you get 10 out of 10, that's a perfect score. So I can believe that God is perfect whilst being an open theist. Like, so in the sense that perfection, in the sense of either omnibenevolence or omniscience. That would just mean that all the knowledge that exists, God has, and omnibenevolence would just mean that God's intentions are always towards the integrity of life and revelation and revealing truth. And that doesn't seem like I can believe both those things and be an open theist, and also believe that God has potential. So when somebody says like whether God has potential or not, to me that just means whether God has free will. Right? So he has the potential to decide otherwise.
Yeah, that's called the principle of alternate possibilities, PAP. Um, the idea that the principle says that in order to have free will, what free will means is that you need to have an alternate possibility. This makes sense in the context of human freedom and choice, but in the sense of God, divine choice, most philosophers of religion are just going to deny that the principle of alternate possibilities is required for divine free will. They'll say that because of all these things, I don't know how they'll work it out essentially, but they're going to look at other principles to like say you can still preserve freedom, but you don't need that alternate possibility. You don't need to have God could have done this or this other thing in order to be fully free. And this also goes back to this, and this is in the literature as well. It's called Augustinian views of free will. Because Augustine, for example, would talk about how to be fully free, like I don't know how it is for you. You're probably not American by hearing your accent, but for Americans and just in the West in general, like we're fiercely individualistic and independent. We don't like being told what to do. We like there to be choice. Like we're fiercely libertarian. We don't want to be constricted in our choices, otherwise that's constricting our freedoms. But an Augustinian or classical view of freedom is that you can have full freedom within restrictions, and it's the restrictions, having of the restrictions in the structure, that enables you to be more free. And an example of this would be like in music, like you've got to have certain structures in music. You got to play notes. You got to have bars. You got to have measures, and so on. But you can play within that, or within art, or within anything like that. Like there has to be certain structures there, and that enables you to actually do the thing and more completely and perfectly, and then also more freely. You have the freedom within those bounds, and so it's kind of foreign to us now today, but this would be how a lot of philosophers like to construe God's freedom, that he wouldn't require that alternate. He wouldn't require an open future, for example, in order to be free. Does that make sense?
He wouldn't require an open future in order to be free.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. It seems like if God is free, he could either have an open future or not. I just never thought of that before.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, if you want, I could just mention how I'd tie together what you just said to potential, right? So, well, for me, right, to say that God has freedom just means that God is his own constraint. Right? So God just sets his own constraints.
Yes.
If there's constraints, then there's nothing outside of God, because God is omnipresent. So the only thing that could constrain God is God himself. I mean, in order to for me to think that God has potential, that just means that God can set his own constraints on things. So he can constrain things so that there's things that God can discover. I just say that that's completely compatible. God being self-constraining is compatible with God having intentions to maximize God's own knowledge and the goodness in reality. So obviously people's acts of charity, God's own acts of charity, those sorts of things, and that's where the potential would consist. So I don't see the conflict between God having potential and God having some self-imposed constraint.
I see. Yeah. I don't know if there would be a conflict, but I do know, having I learned about open theism, and then I went on to learn more like what classical medieval philosophers say about this, and I was like, oh crap, like that's not the same. And I think it's just good to be aware that like if you're going with if you like open theism, which by the way, open theism is is not just a trendy new thing that was in the 2010s. It's a reworking of an old heresy called Socinianism, so by this guy named Socinius. I think he may have been Swiss or something, but I think in the 16th century, and the church declared this a heresy, and they were basing their declaration upon that on older medieval philosophers who had way better arguments than what I'm giving you here, of course. So I mean, go look at that debate. I think there's a Wikipedia page about Jacobus. I think it's Jacobus Socinius. I could be wrong with that, but yeah. So you can read about the whole debate and then like do dive down the rabbit hole sort of thing. Um, but yeah, I think anybody going in this direction, open theism, should be aware. As I was not made aware at the time, but should be aware that like they were cutting against like much older and maybe even more revered tradition than like what this trendy view. I think it offers easy solutions and like natural, intuitive ones, but I think having a more robust understanding of what God is and that He can still have preservative freedom over these things, can still exercise His will, doesn't need potentiality, and that there are reasons for this, namely within God's sovereignty and His oneness and not lacking anything, being fully perfect. Like all those things are going to be reasons why they rejected this heresy. But anyway, that's all I have about that as far as thoughts on that. But I'll let you close. Feel free to be as easy or as hard as you want. Like I know it's a little bit testy there with the heresy and this and that, but I think it's helpful to be just aware of whatever's being said. But yeah, I'll let you have the last word here.
All right. Okay. So I mean, if I did have the opportunity to go on further, I think that
Sure.
I would probably just have to start asking, like, why it is that God having the like sovereignty, the other things that you just mentioned, why that would entail that things like God's energies and graces are uncreated. Because ultimately my position is going to be that God's energies and graces are intense. They're intentions, and those things always have alternatives, so they're created. Whereas I'd say that uncreated aspects of God are the non-contingent things. So the fact that God's a mind, the fact that God's all powerful, I'd say that's non-contingent. Like it couldn't logically be otherwise. That sort of thing. Whereas I regard God's graces to be things that can be otherwise, but God doesn't have the willingness to do so because they are a will. Ultimately, they're a will. They're not logically necessary things. They're choices that God repeatedly makes. So I guess I would probably just leave it at that.
Cool. Yeah, those are all great points. I hope you bring it back. So yeah, call in next time. We'll work it out more. I'll do some more reading on this apparently too.
All right. Me too.
All right. Good to talk to you.